There's something unsettling about a road at 5:30 in the morning. It's not completely silent, but it isn't awake either. The shops are closed, the sun hasn't come up, and if you're traveling at that hour, you're probably thinking about where you're going, not who might be watching. On the morning of May 16th, 2026, Jackline Wanjiru was traveling along a road in Kiritiri, Mbeere South. She was riding behind a boda rider she knew. Then another motorcycle appeared. Two men, their faces concealed. They moved closer, and for a moment, this could have looked like any ordinary interaction between motorcycles on an early morning road, until the second motorcycle came alongside. Something was thrown, and within seconds, a normal journey had become a desperate fight for survival. There was no warning, no confrontation in the middle of a crowd, no argument witnessed by dozens of people, just a dark road, two motorcycles, and an attack that will leave a young mother fighting for her life. But the most important part of this story isn't what happened in those few seconds. It's what those seconds may tell us about everything that came before them, because someone was there. Someone saw the motorcycle, someone survived, and somewhere in the days and weeks that followed, detectives had to walk backward from that morning, trying to understand how Jackline ended up on that road in the first place.
Twisted tales in every folder. Truth runs hot while the trail gets colder. Crown dopers, we don't look away.
Jackie, this my client, ni customer yangu. Na kuanga namchukuanga masaa ya saa 11, kuanzia saa 11 asubuhi mpaka saa 11:30. Saa ilikuwa asubuhi, akanipigia simu, akaniuliza niko wapi. Nikamwambia niko stage. Alafu akaniambia kucho nichukue ndio niende kununua miraa. Nikamwendea, alafu nikapiga U-turn hapo kwa geti yake, akakuja akakalia. Vile alikalia nikaanza kutembeza na motorbike yangu. Kutoka hapo kando hapo kulikuwa na motorbike ilikuwa imetokea kwa barabara. Sasa nikiwa on the way na hiyo pikipiki nayo ikatoka nyuma ikiwa watu ni wawili. Alafu sasa tukiwa the same way wakakuja, walikuwa speed kiasi, wakatukaribia. Mimi nikaona wacha niwapatie nafasi alafu waopateke. Kidogo wakati wanaenda ku overtake, wakaenda wakaslow down. Kwenda ku slow down, moja kwa moja niliona kitu kimeruswa. Saidi sasa huyu mwenye nilikuwa nimebeba kikakuja kikamgonga, alafu hiyo nyingine kanimwagikia saidi na ikamwagika hapa mbele. Kutoka hapo ndio sasa nikasikia macho inawasawasa. Kwenda kufunga macho kidogo hivi kitambo nifungue, tulikuwa tusaanguka kwa mtaro. Na hiyo pikipiki ilienda. Sasa kutoka hapo sikuona au walikuwa wanaume, walikuwa wanawake, lakini walikuwa na maski.
It's approximately 5:30 a.m. Jackline is traveling towards Kiritiri Market. She's on a motorcycle operated by John Juma, a rider familiar with her regular trips. The road is still dark, then Juma notices another motorcycle behind them. It begins closing the distance. According to reports, the motorcycle moves as though it is preparing to overtake. Juma gives way. Then the other motorcycle draws alongside. And that's when the attack happens. A corrosive substance is thrown toward Jackline. It also strikes Juma. The reaction is immediate. Pain, confusion, panic. Juma loses control of the motorcycle. The screams attract attention from people nearby. And suddenly the road is no longer empty. People are running toward the scene. They're trying to understand what has happened. They're trying to help. And Jackline is severely injured. She's taken for medical treatment because of the seriousness of her condition. She is eventually referred to Embu Level 5 Hospital. For her family, the next hours become a blur of hospital corridors, phone calls, and uncertainty. Her mother, Bansi Ndegi, will later recall receiving the news and rushing to the hospital. At that point, there was still hope. Jackline was alive, she was receiving treatment, her family was waiting for a different ending. But that ending never came. Jackline died from the injuries sustained in the attack. She was 27 years old. And now investigators had to confront something even more difficult than identifying the attackers. They had to understand the attack itself, because this didn't appear to be an encounter that simply happened by chance. The suspects had arrived together. They were concealed, they approached Jackline's motorcycle, and they left immediately afterward. There was a surviving witness, but he couldn't identify the attackers. There was a victim, but she could no longer tell investigators what she had seen, and there was a family desperate for an explanation. So detectives had to go backwards into Jackline's life, into her routine, into the people who knew her, and into the question that will shape the investigation. Who knew where Jackline will be that morning? To understand how investigators got to that question, we have to go back, not the attack, but to Jackline. Because before May 16, she was simply living her life. Jackline Wanjiru was 27 years old. She was a mother of one. She was also a hard-working Mbeere trader in the Kiritiri area, and her days were built around work. Early mornings, travel, the market, customers, business, home, repeat. There's something important about that kind of life. It isn't dramatic. And that's precisely the point. Most lives aren't made up of extraordinary moments. They're made up of routines. The same roads, the same people, the same departures, the same destinations. And Jackline's routine included a boda rider named John Juma. He regularly transported her. That familiarity meant there was trust. She knew who she was getting on the motorcycle with. He knew where she was going. And that ordinary arrangement will later become one of the most important details investigators had to examine. Because if someone wanted to intercept Jackline, knowing her routine would make that possible. Think about how much information exists inside a routine. You don't have to know someone's life entirely, but you might only need to know what time they leave, which road they use, who they travel with, where they're going, and how long it takes them to get there. That's enough. And according to reporting, detectives began examining whether the people behind their attack are familiar with Jackline's movements. But before we get there, there's one person in this story whose survival matters. John Juma. Now, Juma wasn't just Jackline's regular rider. He was also a surviving witness. He had been sitting directly in front of her when the attack happened. He saw the motorcycle approach. He experienced the attack himself, and he survived. That made his account critical. But there was a problem. It was still dark, and the men on the other motorcycle had concealed their faces. Juma could describe what happened, but identifying who did it was another matter. That distinction will become crucial, because investigators didn't simply need to know how Jackline was attacked. They needed to establish who had the opportunity to make it happen. And that meant reconstructing a final morning.
Kutoka hapo fira tuliamuka, nilikuwa na gloves. Nikaanza kusikia mikono inachomeka, nikatoa hizo gloves. Kitambo nitoe mvuto ndio hiyo, nikasikia mvuto inachomeka, nikatoa. Alafu nikatoa, nilikuwa na leather jacket hapa mbele na nyuma. Ndio nikatoa, kitambo nitoe kwenda kuangalia madam hapa, madam nguo zake zote zimechomeka. Amekaa uchi. Sasa kutoka hapo ni akaanza kupiga nduru, tusaidie. Wengine wakatoka hapo, alafu wakakuja wakampatia kitambaa. Kutoka hapo mimi nikachukua pikipiki, kwa maana nilikuwa na waso sana. Nikachukua pikipiki yangu na huyo madam akarudi akaitishiwa gari. Ndio moja kwa moja nikakimbia mpaka huko medical. Nikufika medical, gari ndio hii imekuja na yeye. Kufika hapo tukapata daktari hapo, wakamfanyia first aid, tukatumwa Embu. Tukakuja mpaka huko. Kufika huko ndio daktari wakaanza kumshughulikia. Katika ile harakati ya kushughulikiwa, madam alisima.
Now, the DCI investigation began with the scene. 2 motorcycles, a surviving rider, a severely injured passenger, 2 attackers who had disappeared, and a substance capable of causing devastating burns. But every investigation needs somewhere to start, so detectives began asking questions. Who was Jackline? Who knew her? Who knew her movements? Who might have had a reason to harm her? And who could have anticipated where she will be that morning? Now, the attackers had concealed their faces, okay? That immediately created a problem for the surviving witness. Juma had been close enough to experience the attack, but not close enough to give investigators an easy identification. And this is one of those details that sound simple until you imagine the scene. It's dark, remember, 5:30 in the morning. You're moving on a motorcycle. Another motorcycle approaches from behind. Everything happens so quickly, then suddenly you're injured. Your attention isn't on memorizing someone's face, it's on surviving. So investigators couldn't simply rely on eyewitness identification. They had to build a case around the surrounding circumstances, and that's where investigation became much more complicated. Jackline wasn't attacked at a random location while wandering somewhere unfamiliar. She was traveling along a route associated with her regular work. She was traveling at a predictable hour, and she was with a rider familiar with her movements. That raised an obvious investigative question: was someone waiting for her? We cannot answer that with certainty from the publicly available evidence, but it is one of the questions detectives reportedly examined. Citizen Digital reported that investigators were looking into whether the attackers knew Jackline's routine and were investigating the possibility that the attack had been planned. That changes the nature of the case because a spontaneous act and a planned interception require very different explanations. A spontaneous attack might begin with an unexpected confrontation. A planned attack requires information. Someone has to know where to be. Someone has to have the means to carry it out, and someone has to be prepared to act. Which brings us to the substance itself. What exactly was used? Public reports describe it as a corrosive substance believed to be acid. Later reports referred to sulfuric acid. But investigators still had to establish the precise forensic details surrounding the substance and, critically, where it came from. That is not a small question because if an attacker needed a particular substance to carry out an assault, the acquisition of that substance can become part of the investigative trail. Where was it obtained? When? By whom? Was anyone else involved? Did someone purchase or acquire it on behalf of another person? And did anyone notice something unusual? Detectives were reportedly examining exactly that question, the source of the substance, not because finding a chemical automatically identifies a murderer, but because every step in obtaining it potentially creates another point of contact between the attacker and the outside world. Then comes the question families always want answered first. Why? Why would anyone want to hurt Jackline? And this is where we need to separate evidence from speculation. Various claims circulated publicly after Jackline's death concerning her personal relationships and an alleged connection involving another woman. Those claims have appeared in media reports and online discussion, but they have not yet been established in the reliable public records as a confirmed DCI finding. So, they should not be presented as fact. And there's a reason I'm being particularly careful about that, because once a woman becomes the victim of a violent crime, attention can quickly shift from the person who committed the violence to the person who was attacked. People begin asking, what was she doing? Who was she seeing? What kind of life she lived? Whether she had enemies, whether she made somebody angry. And before long, the victim is being investigated by the public more aggressively than the perpetrator. Jackline's private life does not excuse what happened to her. Whatever investigators eventually establish as a motive, the responsibility for the attack belongs to the person or people who carried it out. But here's where the investigation gets interesting. Jackline had a routine. Therefore, someone familiar with that routine could potentially predict where she will be. The attackers used another motorcycle. Therefore, they could approach without immediately attracting attention. They conceal their faces, therefore, identification will be more difficult. The attack happened before sunrise, therefore, visibility was limited. The corrosive substance had to be obtained beforehand, therefore, there may have been a chain of events leading up to the attack, and Juma survived. Therefore, investigators had someone who could reconstruct the attack from inside the scene. None of those facts individually tell us who did it, but together they give detectives a framework, a timeline, a sequence, a set of questions, and that is how investigations are often solved, not with one dramatic revelation, with dozens of small pieces that eventually point in the same direction.
Mimi nilipigiwa simu na kasini yake anaitwa Beatrice, akaniambia Jackie ukupa anakupa, tukimbie hospitali. Hivyo nilivyo, na ndio mimi nikachukua mama yake mdogo, nilianza tu kulia, alafu tukapata means, tukaingia huku, kuja tukakuta marafiki wake wengi walikuwa wameshafika. Nikawauliza ako aje, wakaniambia atapona, hayuko mbaya sana. Katika hizo hali ndipo tukaitwa huko ndani na daktari, Tukaambiwa tuketi, alafu tukaambiwa mgonjwa wetu ameshahaga. Kama familia tungeomba marafiki na serikali na watu wa media wafuatilia hii case juu inaniuma sana. Ni mtoto nimelea, nimesomeza, ako na mtoto mmoja, sio mwesikia, ni wa umri wa chini.
Now, investigators had to look beyond the road. They needed to understand Jackline's recent movements, her relationships, her business dealings, her communications, and the people who might have knowledge of her routine. They also needed to establish whether there was evidence connecting anyone to the motorcycles used in the attack. That means the case could potentially extend far beyond eyewitness testimony, because a person may hide their face, but they still have to travel. They still have to communicate. They still have to obtain things. They still have to return somewhere afterward. And every movement can potentially leave a trace. The challenge was finding it. And this is where we have to stop ourselves from creating an ending that the evidence does not support. As of the publicly available reporting surrounding the case, the investigation had not produced publicly confirmed final account establishing the identity of the person or people responsible and the definitive motive. That means there are still unanswered questions. Who ordered the attack? Who carried it out? Was Jackline personally known to the attackers? How much did they know about her movements? Where did the corrosive substance come from? And was anyone else involved before or after the attack? Those aren't questions for social media detectives. They're questions for investigators, because Jackline's family does not need a viral theory. They need the truth, and the truth has to be strong enough to survive scrutiny. Eventually, the investigation moved alongside another process: grief. Jackline was laid to rest in Geka, Makima Ward in Mbeere South. And the funeral became more than a goodbye. It became a public demand for justice. Local leaders spoke out. Among them was former Embu Deputy Governor Dorothy Nditi, who condemned the violence and called for action. Other local leaders also demanded progress in the investigation. But underneath the speeches, underneath the anger, was a family burying someone they expected to still be alive, a child losing a mother, a community confronting a kind of violence that is difficult to comprehend, and a case that remains defined by questions. There's something we should remember when we talk about cases like Jackline's. The victim's final day can become the center of the story, but it was only one day. Jackline had 27 years before that morning, 27 years of relationships, work, family, ordinary frustrations, ordinary joys, a child who knew her as mom, people who knew her as Jackline, a business that required her to get up and go to work. That is the life that violence interrupted. And perhaps that's why her story deserves more than shock. It deserves attention. Not because the circumstances of her death are sensational, but because the circumstances raise questions about safety, stalking, targeted violence, and the vulnerability created by predictable routines. If someone knows where you will be every morning, they know something about you. If someone repeatedly appears along your route, pay attention. If someone threatens you, tell someone. And if someone close to you says they feel unsafe, believe them. You don't have to solve the situation yourself. You can help them find someone who can. And for Jackline's family, the most important thing now is not speculation. It's accountability. They deserve to know who did this. They deserve to know why. And if there are people responsible for planning or carrying out the attack, they deserve to face justice. Because May 16th began like an ordinary morning. A young mother left home. A rider picked her up. The road was quiet. The sun hadn't risen. And somewhere along that journey, someone decided that Jackline will not reach her destination. We may not yet have every answer, but remembering Jackline means refusing to let the unanswered questions disappear with the headlines. Remember the woman. Remember the mother. Remember the life that existed before the crime. And remember that behind every case file, there is a family waiting for the final page. I'm Wanjiru, and this was Crime Dopers. Until next time, stay aware, stay safe, stay alert. And if someone you love tells you they're afraid, listen and believe them, because sometimes listening early can make all the difference. Amazing! PS to all our Crime Dopers family and faithful listeners, a quick update before you go. First off, a huge thank you to everyone who has been liking, commenting, and sharing our true crime deep dives. Your insights and discussions in the comment section truly make this community special. Now we have some dark, intriguing and rarely told cases lined up for this coming weeks. Make sure your notifications are turned on so you don't miss the next upload. Check out our community tab on YouTube. We'll be posting polls where you can vote on upcoming case topics and share your theories. Now here's a friendly reminder to keep the comments respectful toward victim families and fellow listeners while discussing case theories. And if you have a local mystery or a lesser known case you'd like for us to cover, drop it in the comments or send us a message. Thank you for staying curious and for being a part of Crime Dopers' journey. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and we'll see you in the next case. My name is Wanja. Bye.
Crime Dopers. We don't look away.